Hi, and welcome to Watch It Played. My name is Rodney Smith, and in this video, we're going to learn the 3 to 4 player game Catan Starfarers, designed by Klaus Teuber and published by Catan Studio, who helped sponsor this video. This is a new edition based on the popular but out-of-print Starfarers of Catan from 1999, and it comes with an updated production, revised rules, and variable game board. This is a special tutorial because it's part of an event known as Tabletop Showcase, where my friends and I create a series of videos and podcasts related to a single game. So after you're done watching this, be sure to go to tabletopshowcase.com or check the description of this video for a link to learn about the history of the game, explore the theme, see examples of gameplay, and hear an interview with the designer. But for now, let's head over to the table. As humanity spread throughout the solar system, its population skyrocketed. And now it's time to head for new homes in the deep recesses of space. You've been chosen as a Starfarer to find those new homes, establish trade colonies, forge alliances with alien races, and deal with treacherous space pirates. It's a lot, but the Galactic Empire is looking for a new leader, and it could be you. So join me at the table, and let's learn how to play. The game board comes as 6 interlocking pieces that will look like this once they're put together properly. Now, we just need to fill in the empty spaces with these space sectors, and there are a few different ways that you can do this. The included almanac has options where you flip them face down and arrange them in a semi-random fashion by the stars on their backs, or you can even arrange them completely randomly. But for your first game, they recommend using this exact setup as shown in the main rulebook. That's what I've done here, but before we continue, let me give you a quick tour of the board. Each group of 3 planets is known as a planetary system, and we have 4 of these systems printed directly on this edge of the board, and these are known as the Catanian colonies. These are the colonies the players will start from, and then they will travel out into space and establish new ones. You'll also find 4 alien outposts, which are these 4 sectors, and you'll also have some empty sectors as well. Now it's time to organize the double-sided number discs. These have numbers on one side and a symbol on the other. You'll sort them so they are symbol side up and then organized by type. The layout of these discs is another area where the game allows you to vary the setup, and you'll find that detailed here in this almanac. But for your very first game, they recommend using this exact layout as shown here in the rulebook, and that's what we're going to do. You'll have 9 of the discs that match the symbols found on the starting planetary sectors, and you place them into the matching sectors arranged like the image shown in the rulebook with their number side face up. The rest of the planetary systems have an assortment of symbols, and you randomly place a disc with a matching symbol on each one, keeping them face down. You'll have some leftovers with this symbol, and you'll place them nearby along with the dice, pirate, ice planet, and trade ship tokens. The game also comes with this tray for the 5 different resource cards: ore, fuel, carbon, food, and goods, which you sort into their own piles, placing one in each of the spaces here, ensuring that the goods specifically go into the section labeled 2-1. Then you take 8 cards from each of the 5 resources and shuffle them together into a face-down reserve that you place here. This tray is used to hold the booster, freight pod, and cannon upgrades, as well as the fame metal pieces. You then collect and shuffle these encounter cards, which have this back, and put them face down into the final spot here. Next, sort these friendship cards by their backs, and then flip them face up into stacks beside the board, putting their matching colored friendship token by each one. Now players pick a color and take the related components. You'll receive 9 colonies, 7 trade stations, 3 shipyards, 3 transport ships, 1 victory point marker, and 1 giant freaking mothership. I mean, come on, you gotta admit, that's pretty cool. Now the first time you play, each person needs to find the sticker in their player color and attach it to the bottom of their rocket. And you also have to take the top off your mothership, and this is very simple. You just twist slightly and pull. And then you'll find the game comes with these multicolored plastic balls, and each person needs to take 2 yellow, 1 blue, 1 black, and 1 red, and add it to the body of their rocket, attaching the top back on, which just snaps into place. Basically, you've added the fuel to your rocket so it can fly through space. Right, yeah, let's get back to the tutorial. Everyone now adds one of these boosters to their mothership by attaching it to one of their tail wings, like this, and everyone also collects one of these famed metal pieces. Now each player will start with some of their components already on the board, and again, the almanac will provide you with a way for players to do this, taking turns and choosing where they want to go. But again, the rulebook has a layout that can be used in your first game, which specifically assigns where the pieces should go, and that's what we're going to do in this video. When you're done, the arrangement will look like this, but let's take a moment and examine the pieces a little more closely. As a reminder, this here is a colony, and each player starts with 2 of these on the board. If a colony has a shipyard around it, that makes it a spaceport. Each player starts with a spaceport in play. This is a colony with a transport ship attached to it. These can be popped off and on as required, and when attached, the whole piece is known as a colony ship, and you'll start with one of these as well. To help remember the different pieces, as well as an overview of the steps of a turn and several other useful rules, each player can also collect the 3 overview cards and keep them nearby. Everyone now also draws 3 cards from the top of the reserve and adds them to their hand. You can always look at your own, but keep them a secret from the other players. Everyone now puts their victory point token onto the 4 space of this victory point track, and then takes turns rolling the dice. The person who gets the highest value becomes the first player. And that's the setup. In Catan Starfarers, players will travel from their homes in the Catanian colonies to found new homes in the outer reaches of the galaxy. Every colony and spaceport that you add to the board will give you points. So will creating friendships at alien outposts. Points can also be gained by defeating pirates, terraforming ice planets, and navigating encounters wisely as you fly through space. Be the first to earn 15 points, and you win. The game is played over a series of turns, starting with the first player and going clockwise around and around the table. And on your turn, you'll complete 3 phases, starting with the production phase. Here, the first player rolls the dice and adds their values together. And let's say we got an 11. You now look at every planet with that number, which at the start of the game can only be found on our Catanian colonies. The other planets only show symbols. Now, no matter whose turn it is, each player collects 1 resource matching the color of the planets rolled for every spaceport and colony adjacent to it. We have a green 11 planet here, so both the white and red player will take one of these green food resources. This spaceport is nearby, but not directly adjacent to the planet. The intersections adjacent to the planet are here, 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 and here. Some planets show 2 numbers, generating a resource whenever either is rolled. This produces goods on a roll of 2 or 11, and blue has a spaceport adjacent to it, and yellow has a colony, so each will gain a single good. Blue also has a colony ship here, but these do not provide you with resources. Only each colony and spaceport can. Over time, more planetary systems will be explored, revealing new numbers on their planets. And once players get colonies or spaceports adjacent to them, then those will also generate resources for them when they're rolled during the production phase. And there's no limit to the number of resources a player can have in their hand. Now, I should mention, if you ever need to hand out resources and there aren't enough of a particular type left in the tray, then no one gets any of that resource from those planets during this production phase. I'll also point out that the fonts for the numbers come in different sizes and colors, and this is to remind you of how likely it is that those values will be rolled during the production phase. Larger fonts are more probable than smaller ones, and the red numbers are the ones most likely to be rolled. Okay, so after resources have been collected from the die roll, the current player checks the victory point track and draws 2 free resources from the reserve pile if they have 4 to 7 points, or just 1 if they have 8 or 9 points. If their score is higher than this, they draw nothing. And if you ever run out of cards in the reserve, then form a new pile by taking 8 of each other resource and shuffling them together into a new deck. You may think it's strange for players to start with 4 points, but as we'll see later, you get 1 point for every colony you establish and 2 points for each spaceport. Since everyone starts with 2 colonies and a spaceport on the board, that means they all start with 4 points. Also, if the current player ever forgets to take their free cards during the production phase, they can also take them during the trade and build phase, which is next, if they remember. But it's too late once you start to shake your mothership in the later flight phase. That's right, you shake these, but we'll talk about that later. Now though, we need to see what happens when a player rolls a 7 during the production phase, because none of the planets will ever show a 7, so none of them would produce. Instead, each player counts the resource cards in their hand, and anyone with 8 or more must choose and return half of them to the supply, rounding down. So if I had 9 cards, then I would need to return 4 of them. The current player, the one who rolled the 7, then picks any one opponent and takes one random resource from them. Then going in clockwise order from the current player, everyone but them takes one free resource from the reserve. Once that is done, the current player then gathers the free resources they would normally get based on their position on the victory point track. And that covers all the rules for the production phase, and you'll find a nice summary of this here in the top 2 boxes of your overview card. But with that complete, we now move on to the trade and build phase. Here, as you might have guessed, you can trade and build. And these are 2 separate types of actions, but you can do them both as often as you like in any order. You could build and then trade, do some more building, do some more trading, and so on. Let's start by discussing trading. And one way to do this is with the other players. Just declare what resources you need and what you'd like to offer in exchange. For example, I might say, well, I have 1 food, but I'd like to get 1 fuel for it. Or you might say, I have 2 carbon, but I'd like 1 good in exchange. Players might agree or make counter offers, and discussions can ensue, but only the current player can finalize the deal. If an exchange is agreed upon, the players then swap the related resources, but there are 2 important restrictions. First, a player cannot give away cards and receive nothing in exchange. Also, trade can only happen with the current player. On my turn, other players can only trade with me. They can't trade with each other. The current player can, however, also make trades with the supply. They just trade in any 3 of the same resource for any 1 of anything else. The exception is goods. You can trade in just 2 of those for anything else, and you're reminded of that on the tray itself. Now let's discuss the other action you can take during this phase, building. Here, you'll return resources from your hand to their piles in the supply to add something to the board or to your mothership. The pieces you build will either come from your supply or the general one. So if something has run out, then it cannot be built until that supply has some again. One of the most expensive items you can make is a spaceport, and to build it, you must already have a colony, and it can be anywhere on the board. You then pay back to the supply 3 carbon and 2 food, and put one of your shipyard pieces around it. This turns it into a spaceport, and remember, these are worth 2 victory points total. And I say total because the colony that was originally there was already worth 1 point, so upgrading it to a spaceport gives you just 1 more point. Anytime you gain victory points in the game, move your matching colored marker on this track the appropriate number of spaces. You can also build ships in the game, and there are 2 different types, trade and colony. But when the game refers to ships, it can mean either of them. A trade ship costs 1 ore, 1 fuel, and 2 goods, and you build it by taking a transport ship and a trade station from your supply and putting them together. A colony ship costs 1 ore, 1 fuel, 1 carbon, and 1 food, and you build it by putting a transport ship on a colony that you have in your supply. You only have 3 transport ships in the game, so at most, you can have 3 ships at a time, but later, we'll see how you can travel with these, dropping off the trade stations or colonies, which then returns the transport back to your supply so you can build more ships. Intersections are the spots on the board where lines meet, and after building a ship, it must be placed on an empty intersection directly adjacent to one of your spaceports, and these are known as spaceport sites. This one over here is already full, so any new ships that White builds has to go here. Now they won't be able to build new ships until either one of these have moved or they have a new spaceport with empty sites beside it. Along with building structures and ships, you can also upgrade your mothership. This is an enlarged representation of your transport ships. So every upgrade you assign to it is like upgrading each of your transports that will be flying your trade stations and colonies throughout the galaxy. We'll learn why you'll want to upgrade later, but right now, let's see how you do it. One option is to buy boosters for it, which cost 2 fuel each. You then attach one of these to any of its tail wings, and you can have 6 boosters total. If you instead spend 2 ore, you can add one of these freight pods to your ship, and there's room for up to 5 of these. Finally, we have cannons, which cost 2 carbon each and are attached to the nose of your ship, which can fit up to 6 of them. And don't worry, you don't have to memorize these costs as they're shown on your overview cards. So again, during the trade and build phase, the current player can trade and build as much as they like. And when they're finished, it's time to move on to their flight phase. Unless they don't have any ships on the board, in which case this phase is skipped. But since each player starts with one, let's continue. Now the very first step is to calculate your speed, which you determine by picking up your mothership, flipping it over, and giving it a shake. Then you turn it upright and check which balls are visible. 2 will always be showing, and you first check to see if either are black. If they aren't, you calculate your base speed by adding the values of the 2 colors, which you'll find shown on your overview card. Blue is 1, yellow is 2, and 3 is red. So our base speed here is 5. You then total how many boosters you have installed on your ship and add this to your first value. We have 1 booster, so that makes a total speed of 6. And with that, you can then move your ships. If instead your engine cone shows at least 1 black ball, you ignore the other color, and your base speed is just 3, plus any boosters that you might have. So in this case, it's a speed of 4. However, a black ball means that just before you move any of your ships, you must first resolve an encounter. To do this, the player to your left draws the topmost encounter card from the deck. Only they can see the text on it, and will now read out loud the information in the topmost box. This will detail a situation and then ask the current player to make a choice, either choosing a number or answering yes or no. Once the player has made their choice, the reader reads the related text box out loud. And sometimes you'll get a specific outcome or be asked additional questions. If so, just continue resolving the queries as before until you get a final result. If the encounter requires the player to spend resources, then they return the related amount to the supply. Sometimes an encounter will involve pirates and result in combat. For this, you'll need to determine your combat strength, which is found in a similar way to your speed. You just shake your ship upside down and then check the values of the colored balls that are revealed. Now, if you get black, like I did here, that doesn't cause another encounter, but its value is considered 0. You still get the value of the other ball, though, and then you add to that the number of cannons installed to your ship. This is your combat strength. Now, the encounter will also specify another player to represent the pirates. For example, this says you fight the second player to your right. You're not actually fighting them. They just represent the pirates in this scenario. And they determine their combat strength by shaking their ship and counting their cannon upgrades. The encounter should then be read aloud based on the result. Basically, you want to have a combat strength equal to or higher than the pirate. If the pirate would ever gain resources or anything else from you, they are not given to the player who acted as the pirate. They are just returned to the supply. That said, one of the results of an encounter could be gaining or losing these fame metal pieces. So let's talk about these for a moment. Fame tokens are collected from the tray, and each player starts with 1. But if you ever have 2, you put them together, and they form a victory point symbol, which means you then give yourself a point on the track. Now, an encounter may also cause you to lose a fame metal piece, in which case you remove it in front of you, and if this breaks up a previous pair, you move your marker back down on the track. A half victory point isn't worth anything. There are several other rewards and penalties from encounters, and we won't go through all of them as most are self-explanatory, but there are a couple I should explain. Some encounter rewards will let you make a space jump, which allows you to move any one of your ships to any unoccupied intersection anywhere on the board. That ship will not be able to move further this turn, so you'll also have to respect the rules related to where a ship can end its movement, and we'll discuss those restrictions a little bit later. Another benefit might let you place a trade ship adjacent to one of your spaceports as soon as possible. Now that wording just means that you get to build a trade ship for free, But if you don't have a free space for one by a spaceport, or you don't have the pieces available to build a trade ship just yet, you don't lose this benefit. Instead, you collect one of these trade ship markers and put it in front of you as a reminder to build and place a trade ship at your first opportunity, returning this token back to the supply once you do. All encounters, once resolved, are discarded. But when playing, you may also come across these two wear and tear cards. There are no decisions to be made on these. You just read them aloud, and their effects apply to all of the players. And the last instruction on both of these will cause you to shuffle the discarded encounter cards back into the encounter deck. Remember, if you did have an encounter this turn, then your movement is always 3 plus your boosters. Otherwise, it's the total of your engine colors and your boosters. And this speed applies to each of your ships in play. In other words, let's say with a speed of 5, each of your ships can fly a distance of 5. Distance is counted in connected intersections, so with a speed of 5, I could travel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 like this. Now, as you saw, you can move through other ships or even colonies or spaceports, but you must end your move on an empty intersection. You can also turn back during the same move, covering the same locations, or move fewer spaces than your total amount, or even not move at all. There are other restrictions to movement, but they will make more sense once we understand a few more of the rules. So let's go back to the table, and I'll explain the actions you can take while flying. If your flight takes you to an intersection adjacent to a planetary system with face-down disks, you immediately pause and flip them all over. This is called exploring the system. And if a disk there shows a pirate base, like this, or an ice planet, which would look like this, then you immediately replace it with the larger matching token that we put beside the board during the setup. Then, with the tokens flipped, you can continue your ship's movement if you like. Now, if you end a colony ship's flight on an unoccupied intersection between two planets, which is known as a colony site, then you can choose to establish a colony there by removing the transport ship and returning it to your supply. There are always 3 colony sites in every system. One here, here, and here. However, you cannot establish a colony on either site adjacent to a pirate base or on an ice planet. But we'll see how you can remove those later, which would then allow you to build either here or here. That said, once a colony has been established, you cannot change it back into a colony ship later. But remember, each of your colonies is worth 1 victory point. So once the transport ship has been removed from it, you move up 1 space on the victory point track. Also remember, this colony will now produce resources when the planets adjacent to it are rolled during future production phases. And as we saw earlier, another benefit to colonies is that they can be upgraded to spaceports. And then new ships you build can be deployed by these new spaceports rather than back in your Catanian colonies. This will save you valuable flying time when you're trying to travel deeper into the galaxy. On the board, there are 4 of these outpost sectors, and in the center of each one is a docking point. When you're moving your trade ships during the flight phase, you will likely be trying to take them to one of these outposts, and you can actually fly directly into the center of them. You can then establish a trade station here as long as you have more freight pods installed on your mothership than the number of trade stations already at the outpost. The one I moved to was empty, so I would need just 1 freight pod installed. If there were 3 trade stations on the outpost when I arrived, even if some were mine, then I would need at least 4 freight pods. As long as you satisfy the freight requirement, you then return your transport ship back to your supply and place your trade station into any one of these 5 free dock spaces that are located around the outpost. You then get to pick up the stack of available friendship cards that match that colored outpost, and you pick any one of them to put face up in front of you. These will provide you with various benefits. For example, this one allows me to collect 1 extra fuel resource anytime my colonies produce fuel. Now, we won't go through each of the friendship cards in this video, as their effects are explained on them, but you'll also find them all detailed on the back of the almanac if you have any questions. If you are the first person to place a trade station at an outpost, you also take the related friendship marker. This is worth 2 victory points, which you collect right away. Now, as soon as someone else has more trade stations at that outpost than you do, They take the marker from you, and then they gain 2 points while you lose 2. I had mentioned that you cannot establish a colony on a site that is adjacent to a pirate base or an ice planet. However, if you move one of your ships into an intersection adjacent to one, then you may be able to remove it from the board. If it's a pirate base, like this one, then as long as the number of cannons you have installed on your ship is equal to or higher than the amount showing on its token, you immediately defeat the pirate and collect it. If this had been an ice planet instead, then if the number of freight pods you have installed is equal to or greater than its value, you've terraformed that planet, and you also get to collect the token. In both of these cases, you then replace the disk that was there with a random one that we put beside the board during the setup that has one of these backs. You can then keep traveling if your speed allows. Defeating pirates and terraforming ice planets doesn't just free up the planet, but the token you get from it is worth 1 victory point, as you're shown here on its back. So as soon as you collect one of these, you also immediately adjust your score. Also, remember how I said that some encounter card results can cause you to lose a fame medal piece? Well, those can only affect the half pieces like this one. You can never lose a pirate or ice token once you have it. So if an encounter requires you to lose a fame medal piece and all you have are these, then you lose nothing. Well, now we've covered most of the rules related to movement, but earlier I said there were some restrictions we still had to go over, so let's do that now. You cannot, for example, end your movement on either side of another player's spaceport. Also, a colony ship cannot end its movement on the docking point of an outpost. And a trade ship can only end its movement there if it immediately establishes a trade station. That said, a trade ship can never end its movement on colony sites, which, as we saw, are the intersections directly between 2 planets. A colony ship can end its movement on a colony site, but if it doesn't establish a colony at that time, it must do so on its next turn, or on that following turn, it must leave that space. However, if you started your turn on a colony site, you cannot leave it and then backtrack onto it again. Basically, all of these movement restrictions are to prevent players from blockading important locations on the board. But with that, you now know the rules for the flight phase. And once you've moved all of your ships that you can or wish to, your turn is over, and then you pass the dice to the next player in clockwise order, who then takes their turn. And the game will continue like this until a player reaches 15 or more points on their turn, impressing the alien races of the galaxy and ending the game in their victory. Now, before wrapping up, I just want to draw your attention to a couple of key pages in the almanac, so let's take a look. This setup phase section tells you everything you need to know when you're ready to move past the fixed setup that we used in this video. In this version, players take turns putting their initial pieces on the Catanian colonies, and they also get their choice of starting ship upgrade. You'll also find 3 variant ways to set up the board itself, allowing you to even keep entire planetary systems hidden until a ship encounters it. I'll also mention there are 2 small setup changes for a 3-player game and 1 basic rule change. In short, when establishing colonies, as soon as 2 colonies have been placed within a planetary system, a 3rd cannot be added there. To help you remember that, if you want, you can then block that colony site with a leftover piece from the player color that's not being used. Otherwise, that's everything you need to know to play Catan Starfarers. But if you have any questions about anything you saw here, feel free to put them in the comments below, and I'll gladly answer them as soon as I get a chance. You'll also find forums for discussion, pictures, other videos, and lots more over at the games page at BoardGameGeek, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. And if you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a like, subscribing, and clicking that little bell icon so you get notification anytime we post a new video. And also don't forget to go to tabletopshowcase.com to find our other videos and podcasts about this game if you'd like to learn more. But until next time, thanks for watching.